Welcome back to another episode of the She Overcomes podcast, where we sit down with trailblazers, change makers, and visionaries who are shaping the future in their own unique ways. She Overcomes inspires, equips, and raises up women to become their boldest selves, both personally and professionally. Our mission isn't to empower existing leaders who live with courage and confidence in community. I'm Melanie Rudd, your host and founder of She Overcomes. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to have Khristi Lauren Adams with us today. I was just telling her before we got started that I just started creeping her on LinkedIn. And so I'm so excited to get to meet you in the flesh. But I am going to read part of your bio because it's really valuable to me to share more about you. So you're absolutely filled with bold moves and heartfelt leadership. And really, you have such an amazing passion for the work that you do. So Khristi Lauren Adams is a dynamic author, speaker, ordained minister, and youth advocate. Her work centers on empowering Black girls and women, and she's the author of Womanish Theology, Parable of the Brown Girl, and Unbossed, How Black Girls Are Leading the Way. Her passion for creating community and belonging in educational spaces is truly inspiring. And today we're going to dive into her journey and the incredible impact that she is making. Khristi, thank you for coming.
You for having me.
Absolutely. I always wish I could just be like, should we have coffee forever so we can get to know each other? Right. I know I have got mine too. Cheers. Okay. Well, do you want to just share a little bit? I mean, you really, honestly, I read your bio on LinkedIn and I was like, I have to know this person. Like, you are so educated. You are, just written many, 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 many books. I mean, I think 3, and you've written so much more. But I'd love just to hear about your journey as an author, your journey as an advocate, and really your passion behind what you're doing.
I when I talk to young people about just my journey in general, I always start by telling them, I think there's this assumption that I just knew what I was going to do,
Yeah.
They'll ask you when you're in high school or younger, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that's a great question, but you really just don't know. Some do, some know pretty early, and some just stumble on it. And I think mine has been a journey of just following the breadcrumbs or the yellow brick road and just sort of coming to, as time has gone on. So, when people say, oh, did you always want to be an author? I'm like, I had no idea. I just didn't know it was attainable. I didn't know it was something that I could do. And then I didn't know that I could write that much, to put into a book. I could write it was, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I was saying I had a blog, when people were blogging early on. And I thought that was such a great platform to just get ideas out. And so I would say, I'm a product of the community and the people that poured into me. And I grew up in a home that was very involved in our local church and service in the community. And my local church was very invested in young people and empowering leadership from young people. And I just didn't grow up in a church where it was oh, you're a woman, you can't. I never had that. When I got to seminary, I would hear stories of women, and I could never relate.
Wow. Yeah.
And I count that as an honor and a privilege, right? I wonder what that would have been like growing up. So I didn't bump into any of those types of circumstances where people brought to my attention my gender or my womanhood and my inability to do something until later. And so because of that, we thought we could do anything when we were younger. We're going to try it out. We're going to fail. And it was a mix of that at church, and it was a mix of that in our community. And it was a mix of that even with sports. My parents, my mom was always very much you're going to finish the season.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like it, you may not do it, after. So if I start soccer, I can't quit halfway through. You can quit after, but you
Right.
can't quit halfway through. And so I would try things, dance, violin. I loved violin.
Yeah.
Basketball, I really took a love to. I just tried stuff. And so I feel like, that is why I am who I am today.
Yeah.
I had just such an upbringing where I was able to explore leadership and, explore. I went to public school and then I went to a Catholic school. I wound up graduating from Catholic school in high school, and I just got to explore there too. So
Yeah.
later, I think, as far as my career was concerned, I always said I want to serve. And a lot of that had to do with, again, with my upbringing and who can I help. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll do counseling. I'm advertising major at Temple University.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never really thought, like, I just didn't know, just trying
Right.
stuff out. I did a lot of like playwriting and theater stuff in
Wow.
college.
Yeah.
Again, trying things, but the ministry thing wasn't, it was a part of me, but it wasn't like a vocational,
Sure.
like an aspiration. It was like, I grew up in this environment and I will always be a part of a church community. I will always serve.
Yeah.
I just never thought I would like be a minister.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Did you,
anyway,
do
go ahead.
you minister today? Like, is that, you're pastoring at all, or is that something
So
that's part of your day
Not
to day?
as much.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the first job that I've had. Most of every job that I've had has had some sort of ministry, pastoral, something connected to it.
Okay.
This new job that I have, even though it's at an Episcopal school, doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm partnering with.
Yeah.
And I'll help. There's some local churches in the area that I'll like speak at on a Sunday morning here and there. A friend of mine pastors, Jessie, she pastors like 40 minutes away. And if she needs help, I'll help.
Cool. Oh, I love that. Well, for people who maybe aren't familiar with your books or how you got into writing, will you kind of share a little bit about, just like a blurb, I guess, or the main themes around each one of the books and why you chose to write on those topics?
So the first book was called Parable of the Brown Girl.
Yeah.
At the time, I had actually been a pastoral counselor at a local, like it was called Christian Wellness Center, and it was a counseling center. And I was counseling young girls. Like a lot of moms and dads were bringing their young girls to me.
Yeah.
They were mostly Black girls
Okay.
because it was in a Black community, and they were between like 9 and like 18.
Wow.
And it just so happened that they were being brought to me. And when I was there would be a few times where like, man, I would leave the office in the evening and I'd be the only one. The girl would leave and with her parents. And I would just feel like, wow, we are really journeying together. Like these are some amazing stories. There's so much resilience. So I promised myself if I ever had an opportunity to center, because I'm like, nobody's hearing this. I'm the only one hearing these and experiencing.
Yeah.
And I said, if I ever had an opportunity to center these girls and their stories, I would take advantage of it. Wow. And so that was like 2016. And it was about 2018 that I got my first publishing contract.
Yeah.
And Parable of the Brown Girl, a lot of those stories came out of that experience and just the experiences that I've had with young girls that I've worked with. Yeah. So Parable is really more about, it's called the Parable of the Brown Girl, the Sacred Lives of Girls of Color. And there are just 7 different, just anonymous stories of girls that I've met and just picked up at, whatever point during their journeys and whatever stood out. And so each chapter kind of goes into, like, there's one girl that's, talking about being weak and why God, she asked, why would God make me weak when I'm, or why would God, forgot what the question was, darn it. Yeah. It was like, well, why would God make me a warrior when I'm really just weak? And I was 9 and I journeyed with her through that. Wow. And I talk about this sort of like this idea of Black women having to be strong and how a 9-year-old girl started there. And what does that mean for young girls? So each chapter sort of goes into cultural realities. Yeah. Wow. And then the second book, Unbossed, actually happened during COVID. And after the murder of George Floyd, that was like, got a lot of national attention back in 2020. Yeah. But I was already fascinated with the resilience of the young people during COVID. Yeah. They were just really stepping up to the plate. Like it was like, they were just really dealt a difficult hand. And to see them that summer creating movements and, just
Yeah.
like, just
Yeah.
their, again, resilience.
Yeah.
So I wrote about real girls this time.
Yeah.
The other ones were real, but they were anonymous, but girls
Right.
who are starting like, nonprofits, literacy nonprofits, mental health organizations.
Yeah.
There's like just so many like climate change
Yeah.
organizations. Like,
Yeah.
it was just I wrote about those girls. And
Yeah.
so that's what Unbossed is about. And
Mhm.
then this last book is called Womanish Theology, Discovering God Through the Lens of Black Girlhood. And it's more about the how I was introduced to spiritual principles as a young girl. It wasn't when I got to seminary. So
Yeah.
how young Black girls have their spiritual journey start for them at very young ages. And
Yeah.
so I take different theological concepts like prayer and scripture,
Yeah.
hospitality and community service. And it's a partly memoir
Yeah.
because I tell my own story, my own journey. But then I also talk about how these contemporary Gen Z girls, how they perceive scripture and
Right.
prayer, evil and suffering. So
Right. Yeah. Well, and I had mentioned to you, I had listened to that other podcast and that video you were on, and going chapter by chapter. It honestly was so educational for me. And I was just like, I need to know more. And you talked a little bit about that experience of, I mean, the difference of like when you're writing someone else's story or a parable versus, no, I have to go back in. Like what was that like for you it was partial memoir on with womanish theology, and with that, will you to those who maybe aren't familiar with that term, like, can you define womanish for our listeners and just kind of explain a little bit more of what that means?
I'll start with that.
Okay.
And womanish, so there is feminism,
Yes.
and out of feminism, so back in the 60s, of course.
Yeah.
So there was the feminist movement, there was the civil rights movement, Black Power movement,
Mhm.
and all these movements addressed usually one aspect of identity. And
Right.
so Black women at one point said, well, the Black Power movement or the civil rights movement is addressing my ethnicity, but not
Yeah.
addressing my womanhood.
Yeah.
The feminist movement, there may have been women's rights were granted, but because they were Black, they weren't,
Right.
they still weren't able to vote. So the sort of like complexities of the different layers of our identities were not addressed in those movements
Right.
in our totality. And so out of that came maybe more Black feminism, but then came something called womanism,
Yeah.
which people would probably understand Black feminism more than womanism. But womanism was a term coined by an author named Alice Walker.
Yeah.
And she had this book called In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And she just created the term womanist.
Yeah.
And she took it from a term that was in the past used in the Black community. It was a term called womanish.
Yeah.
That mothers and elders and grandmothers would use on their daughters who, if you're in a conversation and, adults are in a room and, a little child asks, what you talking about? It's like, stay out of our business. You're being womanish.
Yeah.
It's not a term that this generation hears or knows anything about. I would say it's not a term in our contemporary Black community that's used. So I would say it's more of a term in the past.
Yeah.
So I took womanish from that.
Yep.
Because it had to do with girls. And when I was thinking about, okay, what would this theology look like? Because they already have womanist theology that addresses the experiences of Black women, religious experiences, but womanish addresses the religious and spiritual experiences of Black girls.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then,
sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, I love it. I like, I'm just like here for this. So yeah. And so then with that, then how was that like pulling your stories from the past and then bringing it into that book?
So originally I wasn't gonna write about myself. All my books have not really been. I might give an example here and there.
Sure.
So that was like really hard. And it was even hard to accept. I think when people think of books written about people, it's like, Michelle Obama,
Right.
Like it's always somebody that's had like this full life that's already, so like, you're, Adele. Like it's just
Yeah.
like there are people that have books that write about themselves that it makes sense.
Yeah.
But then for me, it was like that doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
or an autobiography after a person is long gone. So it's like
Yeah.
things like that. I couldn't really conceptualize it. Once I accepted that and was like, yeah, it makes sense to what I'm trying to say.
Right.
It was really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could be emotional,
Hmm.
and in a good way.
Yeah.
I think that level of like deep reflection, you
Yeah.
got to go back and you got to remember. And when you do remember, it's a beautiful thing when
Yes.
you do, but you got to really put yourself in a position to like sit and think and give yourself time to reflect and remember the smells and the
Yeah.
colors and,
Hmm.
when did I, but it was a beautiful experience because had I not written this, I think I did say in that interview, there's a lot of gratitude that I
Yeah.
have because we just don't often take the time to think about why am I who I am or how did I get here? We talk about it here and there, but it was like months of me
Hmm.
sitting and reflecting, which I would not have done had I not written
Yeah.
this book.
Yeah. I haven't shared this with you. I have a manuscript for a memoir, and I mean, it honestly, it's like been a decade of writing, and
Mm,
and so I'm
wow, that's
working with a.
awesome.
It's so thank you, but it's like, oh, like it's just it was very
Yeah,
therapeutic, but the self reflection and the time because you go back and you re-feel all those feelings.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
it's just different. It's not bad. It's just like wow, I'm a
right?
different person as a result of this, and and so yeah, it's I totally get that.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful. So, okay, just a quick kind of sidebar here with Unbossed. So you were I just want to bring this up. The Black Girls Unbossed. You were a finalist for awards. Can you talk a little bit more about like I mean that this I like I said like I read your LinkedIn and I'm like I need to know this person. She is really amazing. Like tell me more about that experience of like being awarded as a thought leader and influencer in this space, and then also like the work you do today as an advocate, and share more about what that experience has been like.
The award started with Parable the Brown Girl.
Oh, it did. Okay, okay,
Yeah, it did. I mean, I got a little recognition for
sure.
Unbossed, but Parable
Okay,
got like some real
got you.
like, and I'm saying it in the sense of like because it came out February 2020,
Of
and I had a book
course.
release, and
Yeah.
I had things that month
Yeah.
when I was ready. I was so excited. First book, just
Yeah.
like everybody was, and then everything shut down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So things unfolded with Parable on its own.
Got you.
And
Yeah.
even with the awards, I was like, okay, like it was just, we were just taking life as it was coming. So I couldn't even really, like, I enjoyed it, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I truly, like, it's very humbling. Let me just
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I would hear, hey, Chris, did you know your book is in Essence magazine? Did you know Parable was mentioned in Vogue? I mean, those
Wow.
things were happening in my sweatpants at home with my parents and my dog. We were baking. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
Like
love
we were
that
just
so
making
much.
stuff. It was during COVID, and I would
Yeah.
be like, "Oh, Parable's in Vogue.
Yeah.
You got, what kind of cupcakes do you want?" Like it was
Right.
so. It's like mind blowing now to just like think about it, and I
Yeah.
would just move on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
You know.
both of the awards, I think one was like New York Black Librarians Caucus, another one
Yeah.
was African American Literary Awards, and it's just happening. Like it's
Right.
just like happening.
Yeah.
And then they have these award ceremonies on Zoom.
Yeah.
And I was living in a girls' dorm, one time when I was like accepting awards, and all these people were on this Zoom call, and I can hear the 22 girls that I
Yeah.
lived with outside the hall fighting.
Yeah.
And I'm in my nice top and my flannel bottoms. Like I was sitting there, like when I remember when I got off that Zoom call, I think I turned on Real Housewives, and the girls were still yelling in the background, and
Yeah.
I was like, God, I didn't need to be this humbled.
Right. Yes.
You
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm familiar. Yeah.
know? So yes, it was a bittersweet. It was beautiful. It's an honor for people to recognize,
Yeah.
but the circumstances under which it happened, it was like it's completely out of my hands.
Right. Yeah.
So I was happy about it,
Yeah.
and then the book was selling on its own by nature of what was happening in the
Right.
world.
Yeah.
So they would say, "Oh, your number shot up," and I was like, "Oh, I don't want to capitalize off of like things
Right.
happening in the country. I didn't know,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was great. And I kind of wouldn't trade it because I love the little gems that I've gotten
Yeah.
from the experience. And Unbossed was written during
Yeah.
COVID too.
Yep.
So it was another one of those. So when Womanish came, I was like, whatever, like whatever happens,
I
like
actually
I
love that so much. It's just so real. Like, like it's just so real and authentic. And it's like, yeah, this is life. This is how we roll. I love that.
Yeah. And it's like I wasn't even submitting. I
Right.
don't even know how these things happen. I'm sure there are formal processes that
Yeah.
people have for submitting things.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
What I love about your books, Khristi, is that I think that what was beautiful is that they came out at a time that they needed to. Like there was it feels, or at least like from what you're saying, it's like it wasn't like this strategy of here's how I'm going to get the most views or sell the most books. It was, this is what's true about my heart right now. This is what I'm writing. This is the voice that needs to be heard. And it's like divine timing. It came out when it needed to.
Yeah, this is the first time anybody has ever really acknowledged that. I will say that I've
Really?
interviewed because they usually, it's not their fault, but I
No.
think they usually are like, how did you know? That's what I
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
How did you know? Especially Parable. When
Yeah.
Parable came out, it was like, how did you know this was and I said, you have to understand,
Yeah.
sign the contract in 2018. You send the
Right.
proposal that summer. None of this was happening.
Right. Yes.
Context completely. Everybody was in bliss the
Yeah.
summer of 2018.
Yeah.
Kind of, not
Yeah.
everybody, but you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it was just a different world.
Yeah.
And so, although for Unbossed, even though I wrote because of the context,
Yes.
but it was still like these were all just passion projects, but they're long. So
Right.
you kind of hope there will be things like when Simone Biles, the first Olympic sort of summer, and then she stepped back because of her mental health.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, I wish Unbossed was out now,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
and Unbossed wasn't coming out. That was that summer before Unbossed would come out that
Yep.
March, and that was August.
Yeah.
And I was trying so hard to like, you can't make it work. You
I
just got to
know.
let it go. You just got to like trust that
Yeah.
it's going to come out, or that maybe a few years from now,
Yeah.
somebody pick it up and
Yeah.
so
And
who
that's
knows?
how it is. I know, and I am not, I don't have as many books as you. I don't have the same experience. But when I first wrote my first manuscript, I knew the name that I wanted it to be. I mean, I wanted the name to be Jesus Doesn't Cuddle, like, which sounds really funny, but it was a statement someone said to me. I had just had this like nervous breakdown. My life had just fallen apart, and this person in my life had just said, Mel, Jesus doesn't cuddle. Just read your Bible.
Oh, wow.
I know what she was trying to say. I know she was honestly trying to like love me, like tough love, pull it together,
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but and so it felt it maybe wounded me more than it helped me at that time. But
Mhm.
so I thought that book was going to be published. I was like, this is happening now, and that was in like 2000 and I don't know. I think I started sending it out to publishers in 2017, and I'm like, now is the time. Well,
Yeah.
and then it wasn't.
Yeah.
And as I look back, I realized like I actually needed a bit more healing. I needed a bit more self-reflection. As much as I thought that the time was then, it wasn't. And now it's coming out in March, and I'm like super excited about it. But I'm sort of like in
Same
retro.
title?
What's that?
Same title?
No, different title.
Okay.
I'm working on the edits
That's
with the
funny.
manuscript right now with
Okay.
the publisher and the editor, and so I think I know the title, but I don't want to say it
Yeah.
just yet,
Okay.
just because it might go through some changes. Different title.
Get it. Yeah.
I think we did keep the chapter though. We kept that chapter because
Okay.
it was
Yeah.
like it like I said, it words that were meant to maybe heal or make me stronger. I felt wounded by them. However, it was the moment that I realized I need a God encounter, and he's going to be the only person who's going to do that. It's not going to be by my might. So it was kind of me. Like, did you ever watch Forrest Gump?
Yeah.
Like it was my Lieutenant Dan moment. Like, I was like, yeah. So that's my Lieutenant
Okay.
Dan moment is Jesus doesn't cuddle the
Yeah,
chapter.
okay. Okay.
Like,
That's
show
good.
up or I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
That's good.
but no, I think divine timing is real. And I think sometimes, and it does seem like right now is a time like a Kairos moment. It's a time in history when our voices really matter, but more than our voices, the words that are coming out of them matter more, and what are you adding to the culture? What are you adding to instead? Anybody can criticize. Anybody can find it's very, very easy to find out what's wrong with the culture. But if you can step into and I feel like you've stepped into a place, given a voice, and use those words very intentionally to create a message. And I don't think you would see that type of success and favor that you've had with your books if that wasn't present. And I love that, because now we know it's not a marketing plan. It's the favor of God. It's not a marketing plan, right?
It's not.
Yeah, it's not.
That's that first one.
Yeah. No, I love that so much.
I just remember those, originally those two award ceremonies where one was supposed to be at the Schomburg Cultural Center in Harlem. And I was just like,
in your jammies. Yeah.
Yeah. In pajamas in my dorm with the girls. Like, oh my God. And I love it. I love the girls, and I won't trade. And then some of them, I got the stories from the book out of.
Yeah. I love that. I'll tell you this too, and then I'm going to move on. But because I knew I was going to be writing, I had a book agent that I was talking to a lot, and some of my memoirs, kind of hard stuff, and so I was one of those women who was told, like, women can't speak up, women can't teach and preach, women aren't allowed to be educated. So I came from a really fundamentalist place that silenced women a lot. And so I write about that. But I had a gal say to me, this agent, say, like, you write about hard stuff. Can you speak about it? And I was like, I'll try. So I tried out for a TED Talk and cried during my TED. I cried on stage. Yeah, in front of people. And it occurred to me, no, I cannot talk about this yet. So in 2019, someone asked me to do Mrs. North Dakota. And I was like, no, hard no. I'm not interested at all. And this agent said, Melanie, why don't you take this as practice? Just practice talking about hard stuff on stage so you can just kind of get the muscle memory. And so 2019, I'm like, oh, fine, I'll do this with hopes of talking more. And then 2020, I won. I like accidentally. Yeah. But it's funny because 2020, and I would laugh because I would be like, I'm probably the perfect person to win during a pandemic because
that is fascinating.
Yeah, I didn't. And I did it to practice. I was like, I need to get over my fear of public speaking. I need to be able to communicate hard things in a way that people can relate. And so it was a year of practice. But yeah, I was like, how funny that I won up on the heels of a pandemic. And so kind of similar, like, well, here we go.
Right. It's going to go with it.
It's going to win it. But okay, so to switch gears a little bit. So will you talk a little bit more about what you're doing now at St. Paul's? And I know it's a new position, but to make sure I have this right, you're the executive director of community and belonging, right? Is that title is beautiful. Like that, the sense of belonging piece at the end is what got me. So do you want to just share a little bit more about how you came into this space?
So, St. Paul's has 6 schools.
Yeah.
We were talking about this. And so they're one big community of, they're pre-K, you walk in, there's babies in the nursery, in the crib.
Wow, that's awesome.
And it goes from babies in the crib.
Yeah.
All the way to senior year in high school.
Yeah.
And there are different schools. There's a girls' middle school, then there's a girls' upper school, there's a boys' middle school, boys' upper. So there's an elementary school, there's a preschool, and it's on one big campus. And my responsibility is to figure out how to bring the community together
Okay.
a bit more. So to address issues of course, diversity and
Yes.
equity and each school has their own person that's really doing that. So that's not like my main job. I kind of oversee,
Sure.
but I explained it actually this way to the trustees like a few weeks ago. I did a presentation and I said, there's this scripture about, I don't know, where Jesus is talking about how if the 99 are like there, then you still go out in search of the one.
Yeah.
And I was like, I believe that's my philosophy when it comes to this community and belonging. It's like there should not be one person
Right.
who feels like they don't belong, who feels ostracized. There shouldn't be one. And that is a lofty goal to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
It keeps us on our toes, right? Where a lot of times, like you'll hear experiences that people have had at schools, alumni.
Mm-hmm.
Some will say, this was the best place on earth. And some will say, I got called this, I
Yeah.
felt this,
Yeah.
and then so we should be seeing that as we don't want those, right? We don't want the students, we don't want even the adults.
Yeah.
And so if an adult comes, so anyway, that is sort of the foundation for
Yeah.
how I will try to build the program there.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to create like little community groups on campus, little affinity groups,
Yeah.
groups of even not just like sort of ethnic or cultural, religious.
Yeah.
They do these little like kind of like non-alcoholic happy hours.
Sure.
They do, bowling club, those
Yeah.
are like little kind of fun things. But then there's also things like if faculty are feeling discriminated against or
Yeah.
feeling whatever. So it's just a part of that. And then also bringing all the traditions together. Like when is the school completely together as one? Or what are
Yeah.
some things that we can do, like service projects? So
I love
those are the things that I'm working on right now
Cool.
at the job.
I love that. So I actually am kind of curious about this. I know that there's a handful in the corporate spaces, there's a handful of organizations that are dropping diversity and inclusion from
Mhm.
their core values. I don't know, core values or maybe initiatives that they're working on. Um, what do you see the potential, like, what do you see with that? Like, what are your thoughts on something like that as we're entering in a season where that could be the case?
Yeah. What I said to the St. Paul's trustees and people is
Yeah.
when I worked at another school and did DEI work before that in
Yeah.
spiritual life,
Yeah.
and it was called the Hill School. And
Okay.
I said, we built a successful program in rural Pennsylvania at a boarding school
Yeah.
that actually two of our alum are our new president's sons.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
like this was the context that I was in DI under. It wasn't a good hostile context, but like
No.
just gives you an idea,
Yep. Yeah.
But also the governor who's a Democrat went to the Hill. So it was like
Yeah.
it was a smorgasbord
Right.
of different types of people. But our focus was we know what it is, what people think about DEI or whatever
Right.
outside of this space.
Yeah.
What does it mean for the Hill School? That's
Gotcha.
how are we going to protect how we define what we do here?
Yeah.
I also say DEI was not DEI 15 years ago. It was just
Yeah.
people who just had multicultural affairs.
Right.
I don't know where this came, where this whole thing came from. People
Yeah.
weren't saying DEI in 1990.
No, they
It
weren't.
just
No.
happening. It
Yeah.
was like director of multicultural or whatever.
Hmm.
So I'm like, okay, the work has always been done no matter what you're gonna call it. And if you want to get rid of DI, feel free.
Right.
The work still needs to be done of people feeling people belonging in the space and
Yes.
creating ways that we can cater to that. And
Yep.
so the last thing I'll say is like I always say, like, I build it on a care ethic. So DEI is not political,
Yeah.
not at St. Paul's and not at Hill.
Yeah.
It's always just how are we caring for?
Oh.
How are we caring for? How are we celebrating? How are we honoring? How are we making sure, like our boarding schools at the time, our motto was a family boarding school.
Yeah.
Are they a part of the family?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
care thing. So even if something discriminatory were to happen,
Sure.
we were dealing with it. We were dealing with care on both ends. We
Yeah.
were dealing with restoration. We were dealing with wholeness. So it wasn't this, defensive,
Yeah.
kind of indoctrinate. And if that's how they want to define it outside and get
Yeah.
rid of it, fine.
Right.
But that's not what we do here. And that's
Yeah.
how I move forward.
I think that is the most beautiful explanation of that. And it is so honoring. There is such an honoring way of approaching something that has been politicized or something that has been, it sometimes feels really divisive. And, and so I think like that to me, I'm like, oh my gosh. So you honor people and love them well. Amazing.
Yeah. And that's why at Hill, like
yeah.
one of my closest friends now,
Yeah.
her name's Lisa. She was like, she's the director of counseling center at Hill. We worked so closely together.
Yeah.
Like the counseling center and spiritual life.
Yeah.
Mercy included. We were one because all of it overlapped.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And caring for, it was always, all right, does this person have like, and how are we caring for? How are we like, it was that. It wasn't anything outside of that.
Yes.
But if you don't have people, and I will go around to workshops and say this, I truly believe people that do DEI, multicultural, cultural, community work, whatever, need to have some sort of either counseling background.
Yeah.
They got to have the care piece, because when they don't, and it comes in as though numbers and, agendas, that's when you get the issues that we're getting with right now.
Oh, wow. Well, that's amazing. So, so I'll just put this out there. Khristi's not probably going to advertise for herself, but I will. You can contact her on LinkedIn, and you can email her and hire her to come and speak on this, because absolutely the message you're sharing is unique. It's not, I don't know that there's a lot of folks that are approaching that with a care-centered focus, so good job. That's so remarkable.
Really quick is because it's new.
Yeah.
Like I said, because there was it's like leadership studies. Leadership studies didn't you have like PhDs in leadership studies now, but there wasn't that in the 90s because there wasn't enough research. And I think the same thing with DEI, there's no template for it. So everybody's just the blind leading the blind. Yeah. And so because of that, everybody's sort of making up what their definition of it is, how they want to approach it. We need one unified approach. And I think it's one that's focused on care ethics.
Ugh, I love it. Gosh, you're so smart. See, this is why we're talking. Good job. So and then we'll just talk a little bit more in a second. But the last question that I have here is that with the book Unbossed, it really speaks to owning of one's own power. I'm just going to read this. In refusing to conform to societal expectations. Can you talk a little about what does that look like to own your power and not conform? Not being the people pleaser, not being the stepping into the expectations of others. How have you seen Black girls do that, young women do that, and embody that in your work?
Not step in the expectations?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
So how have I seen Black girls not step in the
kind of pushing back, owning their power. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a generation that's really defiant. I guess most of here, but this is the generation that sort of marches to the beat of their own drum, and that's why it can be kind of uncomfortable for us, for a lot of us who had scripted upbringings, scripted societies, and this is sort of how you behave and how you don't. And so even for me, I'll look at some of the kids and I'm like, what are you wearing? What are you doing? What are you posting? I mean, that just comes out of me. It's just a natural judgment because not to say that I didn't do things. It's just, they're not even they just don't care,
Yes.
I think that there needs to be some guidance there, but I also think that there needs to be some learning from that. And that's sort of why I write and do the work that I do. Cause it's there's something there that they have that I just didn't have as a teenager and, or as a younger person. And I just think that because of that, they just have this natural ability to not conform.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really innate. It's Black girls, but it's very much this younger Gen Z gen coming up. They just sort of do their own thing. So I'd love to do some more research on that because I'm just fascinated by it. Why don't you care? I cared,
me too. I care.
What is that? So I don't see the conformity as much with this new generation. If anything, they're conforming to their peers, conforming to each other and the expectations that they have set for each other, not really for, older generations.
Yeah, they don't care. Yeah, totally. So I'm going to rapid fire a couple questions while we start, start landing the plane, if you will. If there's one leadership tip you could give to a woman, a Black girl, whoever is in front of you in this moment, like what is that tip? What's the one thing you would say to really inspire someone to make the biggest change or the biggest impact in their life today?
I would probably say there's a few things. I think that everything that we need, we have. It's in us. Yeah. And there are things that are innate. There are things that are right under your nose. Yeah. I just don't think we have to search far for what it is that we're called to do, you know? Yeah. And so that's one thing. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is just really being your most authentic self. You have to really be. You can't be anybody else. And so that's why when we were talking about public speaking and I used to cry before class and giving presentations and things like that. And then eventually, one of my professors said to me, it's okay to not know. I remember, if I ask you a question in class and you don't know, say I don't know. Yeah. It's okay. That is a response. And I was that just opened up so much for me because it was kind of I just bring myself if I don't know, or if I didn't read it, or, you know, or and so that's sort of that I've brought to whether it's I'm preaching, whether I'm doing podcasts, whatever it is, you just bring your conversational, normal, self, even if you're fumbling words, if you're whatever, people want to see that realness. They don't want to see the performance. Right. Yeah. And I think we need to see more of that. We're more attracted to that.
Yeah. Do you want to be my personal coach? I love that so much. No, I really do. I was teaching last week to one of our cohorts about perfectionism. And I was just doing a lot of research around performance and perception, and all of the stuff I was reading is pointing to this sense of perfectionism, that there's this deep, deep fear, whether I'm afraid that I can't perform for you or I'm afraid you're going to perceive me in a certain way. It's leading me to this ideology that I have to be perfect. And it's that's such a lie. Why are we buying that? That's not true, And so thank you. I love that. That's so good. Okay. What is one book that you think everyone should read?
Half the Sky.
Oh, yeah.
I have it back here anymore. I think I let somebody borrow it and then I just never saw it again.
Yeah. I quit borrowing books out.
Sky is a good one. Yeah. It's any of the women's empowerment. It just, if anybody hasn't read it, it was a New York Times bestseller, and it was just about women's stories from all over the world. Yeah. And, real true stories. Some of the stories really heartbreaking, but just really empowering. That was probably the start of my personal women's empowerment. When I read that years ago. I've never read a book and cried, and I remember reading that and just was tearing up, and it's just so inspiring. I probably need to read it again. Let me order it.
I think I do too. Yeah. I used to work in anti-trafficking, and I remember that was the first book I was told to read was Half the Sky. And for some reason I'm I know I actually still have it, but I can't remember the end. I'm well, did I finish it? So now I'm okay, good. I'll read that.
I don't know if I finished it. Yeah. I got through a lot of the stories though.
Yeah. I think I did too. Yeah. No. Okay. And now here's something funny. What's your motivational song? What's your go-to song when you're getting ready for a podcast?
Oh my gosh, that is really hard. Earth, Wind and Fire. Yeah. They sing the September. Do you remember? Yeah. I would say it's their, I put on their greatest hits when I bake.
Do you? Okay.
It's just that's just what I do. I don't know why I'm like that. So I just for some reason I could put on their old sort of 70s and just escape. Yeah. So I would say not necessarily motivational, but it's music that just helps me come down and be present. Yeah. That's really.
I love that. Yeah. I love that so much. Okay. So now how can people connect to you? Like this, I'm so excited that we were able to do this. Thank you so much. We had some technical difficulties and this is amazing. But how can people, where can they buy your books? Do you have websites to share? How can people connect to you if something just inspired them and they want to know more and learn more?
So my website is KhristiLaurenAdams.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn the same way Mel did. You can, Instagram is probably my main one. I'm on Facebook a little bit.
Yeah.
And then Threads now. I'm trying to get on Threads, but it's just so hard with all this social media. But if all else fails, just type my name in Google and things will come up. The books will come up. Awesome. The different sites that you can order the books on. You can even visit a Barnes and Noble and the books will be there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Khristi. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your journey. And it's just been really amazing to hear more about your life and the books. And I definitely want to stay in touch and find out ways that we can continue to support you in what you're doing and share more of your work.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, if you've enjoyed today's conversations, be sure to subscribe to the She Overcomes podcast for more episodes where we feature leaders like Khristi who are making a huge impact. We want to see all women walking in their authority and power as bold leaders in every sphere of influence they belong to. Remember, you are stronger than you think you are. Until next time, stay inspired and lead with courage and confidence in your community.